Dan Rubenstein. We have breaking news.
We do indeed.
Per our friend Brett McMurphy, it is going to happen. Oregon and Washington are going to be invited to the Big Ten. They are going to accept that invite. This follows what I can only describe as a whirlwind over the last 12 hours or so. So just to paint the picture for folks out there who are watching this live as we're out on YouTube, who are listening in their cars on the way home from work.
Yeah.
The last 12 hours have been kind of crazy. There was a meeting last night with the Arizona Board of Regents. There was also a board meeting that went deep into the night on the Washington side.
Yeah.
We all sort of went to bed thinking that this was inevitable, that the Pac-12 was going to end up breaking up. We woke up this morning and suddenly many of the reporters that we know and love and have on our show from time to time are reporting something quite to the contrary. There is renewed optimism among those in the Pac-12 that perhaps they could meet, and among the remaining 9 teams, they could sign, seal, and deliver this grant of rights deal. Again, to reiterate, the grant of rights deal that we talk about here, the TV deal with respect to the Pac-12, was largely streaming. It was a deal through Apple. It would pay somewhere in the vicinity of $20 to $25 million. We never got that official number. There'd be incentives and escalators to make it higher, but that was the deal. It seemed as if everyone was honky-dory with that this morning, and then suddenly it began to fall apart again. Suddenly we start seeing reports about Washington having concerns about the Apple deal. Suddenly we start seeing reports about the Big Ten meeting to perhaps extend an invite out to Oregon and Washington, despite some objections that I guess they worked out on the financial side.
Got a great deal. Got a great deal.
Got a great deal. And so now here we are, Dan, a little bit before 1 p.m. on the East Coast on Friday. What is it? August the 4th.
Oh, man.
It sort of becomes official. I guess not officially official, but it seems as if the die has been cast that your Oregon Ducks alongside your Washington Huskies,
my Washington Huskies,
are headed to the Big Ten. So a lot to digest, a lot to unpack. We are doing this live on YouTube. For folks who are watching live, send us your comments. Maybe we'll post some at the end. For our verballers at verballers.com, our Patreon, who are, I know, chatting it up in Discord, leave some comments there. We'll try to incorporate those as well. Of course, those will be the first ones we incorporate because they're our trusted verballers. But
yeah,
Dan, how do you feel right now, man? This is a big deal.
So there's a number of different ways to attack this. I'll selfishly start with my own personal feelings look, Oregon didn't call me. Washington didn't call me. It doesn't matter what I think. I'm disappointed. I'm in touch with reality in that everybody knew that this was a strong possibility of happening, and the reasons are fairly obvious to everybody who pays attention to college football, if not even more specifically West Coast football. And the Pac-12 has been in a precarious place with USC and UCLA leaving, and the possibility of signing a disappointing TV deal looming over everybody's head in the Pac-10, 9, 8. Obviously, Colorado leaves last week. But in terms of how I feel as an Oregon fan, both the sadness of West Coast football dying, and I know people are like, oh, you got the LA schools, Oregon, Washington, they're going to be playing each other every year, and it's not West Coast football. These are West Coast tokens. That's I think the phrase I used. The Big Ten got a deal on parts, and they are happy to take it and expand their West Coast footprint so they can sell Rotel ads at 10:49 p.m. Eastern. It's what a winning reason to destroy a sport, right? What a winning reason to sell more Crest toothpaste commercials well into the night. Just bang up job. So yeah, my reaction is I understand. What am I in my late 30s, early 40s, Ty? I forget how old I am.
You're now squarely in your 5th decade of life.
Squarely in my 5th decade. So look, my experience as a college football fan is my experience, and it's that I grew up on the West Coast, and I grew up loving, watching the Oregon schools, Washington schools, Bay Area schools, LA schools, Arizona schools play football and all the names that come with it. So that's my own personal experience. My own feelings are, it's sad that we are getting rid of the scar tissue, the rivalries, the character that is West Coast football. Now, you can say, well, if there were only more West Coast football fans, this might not happen. You're right. You're probably right. But to say that the West Coast shouldn't exist. Sorry, I'm having a Charlie horse right now, Ty, as I'm saying this. I don't know if it's because my emotions are getting the best of me. I have water here. I'm good. Okay, sorry. Let me hydrate along with how everything is going. So it's sadness, right? That Oregon does not strike me as a Big Ten team. Rutgers doesn't strike me as a Big Ten team. I just didn't grow up rooting for Rutgers or Maryland. It all feels gross. It all feels sad. It all feels antithetical to what, again, I'll speak only for myself, what I feel like college football is, which is that, the warring fiefdoms of, the Southwest, the West Coast, the Southeast, the Midwest, the Northeast. Like, it's sad that Big East football doesn't exist anymore. We can pull up the 2009 college football standings and just be really sad that that's not the sport anymore, but that doesn't do anybody any good. Me being sad doesn't do anybody any good, but I can only be me, Ty. And a universe in which Oregon plays Maryland in football or Penn State in football. Look, playing Penn State would be fun. It'd be fun to go to an Oregon Penn State game with you. It's not all that attractive to me. I don't feel anything about Oregon Penn State. I don't feel anything about Oregon Illinois, Oregon Indiana. Like, Oregon's already beaten Michigan and Ohio State on their fields. Can we just move on? Can we just move past the idea? Let's get Oregon to the NFC West, people. I don't know. As for, people are going to look for blame. People are going to look for reasons. I think it's all clear. Everybody is clear that the only winners here are USC alums running Fox Sports, USC and UCLA alums running Fox Sports. The only winners here are the people selling their ads in new windows late at night. The only winners here are the people that are going to directly make money off of this. And guess who that isn't, Ty? Players on the field. So
right. Well,
it's one of those things that just like on every single level, you're just like, who's this for? Who is happy about this? I'm sure some Oregon fans and some Washington fans are happy about this because, looking at the Apple deal, looking at the possibility of the Big 12, looking at the possibility of a tiny conference, looking at the possibility of being left behind. It's awful. It's an awful feeling. Oregon more so than Washington, just because Oregon has built up this big national brand via Nike, via, the brand marketing they do, whatever. And they've, been to a national championship or two in the past dozen years or so. They've had a Heisman winner. And so Oregon can't be left behind. I know that. And I don't want that for Oregon. But sort of two things can be true at once for me as an Oregon fan. And that is, I'm a little bit happy that Oregon is going to be on big television and play big teams. That's interesting to me on a certain level. I cover this sport for a living. But like, the idea of where this sport that we both love so much has been heading for a dozen years and is now just erasing a region, it's not healthy. And if it goes sideways, Ty, Fox will just buy up some NBA games. ESPN will buy more baseball. They'll be fine. They'll write it off as like, well, we tried, didn't work out, on to the next. And there's just a smoldering wreckage of a sport we love left behind.
Yeah, I mean, some tweets out there that I think are, kind of representative of what you've been discussing here. Putting one on the screen from our friend Ari Wasserman, who I think is simpatico with you, Dan. The worst part, it's not being done to improve the product, which I think a lot of people feel that way. It's
right.
Obviously a pretty reasoned viewpoint. Also, this is a little bit more context for people. You mentioned that the Big Ten is getting a hell of a deal. They're buying the parts off of the Pac-12.
Yeah.
This is from Ross Dellinger. This is a little bit dated. It was last night, but I'd expect it's still fairly accurate at time of recording for those listening to the audio version of this, which will drop a little bit later. Ross's tweet was that the Big Ten's offer to Washington and Oregon is expected to be $35 to $40 million annually per team. Yeah. Obviously, some of the hesitation that we heard about this morning with respect to that, Dan, that it's centered around the travel costs, and that would eat into that total revenue. But $35 to $40 million, definitely a more stable conference than I think hanging around and sticking in the Pac-12. There did not seem to be much of an appetite from Oregon and Washington, I think, to join up with the Big 12, if only because they knew that there might be interest from the Big 10. So that brought us to this place where this all happened very quickly. And I think what happens next will also happen quickly. We kind of expected, when all of this news was breaking last night, that it was going to be Arizona and then in quick succession, relatively quick succession, followed by Arizona State and Utah.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is sort of in reverse. We thought that maybe Oregon and Washington would then take that as like their cue to exit stage left.
Yeah.
In fact, it was Oregon and Washington that pulled the trigger first, and it seems as though
Right.
others will follow suit. Arizona sounded like they were going to go regardless,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not it was Oregon or Washington or Arizona State or Utah. They just sort of had their minds made up.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like at the Board of Regents meeting that took place last night that Arizona State did have kind of a seat at that table, and their president was a bit stubborn, as he's wont to do. And so there was some lack of clarity this morning as to whether or not they might move forward at all.
Mm-hmm.
Hence some of that quote unquote renewed optimism. But as it stands at present, we kind of have our answer.
Yep.
We do have a bunch of questions that have come in from folks, a bunch of comments. I think most of them echo your general sentiment.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of an interesting conversation now to balance stability with nostalgia. And that's kind of where we're at, right?
Mhm.
You know why they're doing this. You
Mhm.
know why they're doing this, and you know who this benefits. But at the
Oh,
same time,
You know who did this. You know who did this, Ty. I don't even blame USC as much. USC is definitely to blame. Larry Scott's to blame. A lot of things are here. But you know who's benefiting from this. Yes, this is the sad Fox music, because what's more appropriate? Also, can I say one other thing, Ty?
please, no, go ahead.
There's two great things about this. I want to provide some balance, right? Because if Fox is now in charge of the sport I love, or the half of the sport I love, you got to be fair and balanced, right? Isn't that the motto here?
I think that's the one, yeah.
I think that's the motto. One, there was apparently some sort of handshake deal between USC and reportedly USC and Kevin Warren that Oregon would not be invited because, let's face it, USC has lost 6 of 7 to Oregon, and they're getting out recruited annually by Oregon, and they were happy to try and distance themselves and disadvantage Oregon from West Coast recruiting. Obviously didn't work out, but also, Ty, I'm trying to be positive here.
Sure.
What does this mean for Oregon games and the Oregon game watching experience? No more Rod Gilmore games.
Oh.
ESPN is out of the Big Ten business, Ty. ESPN's out. No more Rod Gilmore truck. No more Rod Gilmore in the booth for Oregon games.
See, it's not all bad, Dan.
Okay, that's all.
It's not all bad.
You want to go to reactions from listeners right now, and we can figure out how we feel about their reactions?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm just scrolling through our Discord here. And again, you can join the Discord at verballers.com. It is like trying to read the Matrix, frankly, because there's just a lot of reaction to
sure.
this. Someone brings up, a lot of folks have brought up Larry Scott.
Mm-hmm.
There was, and we retweeted this out earlier today, kind of an epic quote of his, an epic video clip that was unearthed from 2018, where he talked about the new world media order.
Of course. He doesn't just see himself as a conference commissioner, Ty. He's also a TV executive.
Right.
Awesome.
And, I saw some rebuttals saying, well, a lot of commissioners in 2018 would have said something similar, but obviously Larry Scott, given recent events, is a little bit more under the microscope.
Yeah.
And he saw the situation at that time as, wow, this is going to be great. We're going to be in control of our destiny come 2024 in a way that other conferences aren't. We're going to be positioned to take advantage of the streaming thing. I don't know if anybody had a great idea 5 or 6 years ago what the streaming thing would look like now, but there were many assumptions back then. Larry Scott, a noted poor shepherd of finances for all things Pac-12.
Sure.
And one of the more infamous leaders in college football over the last couple decades. How big a role did Larry Scott play in this debacle that we currently find ourselves in?
Significant. Obviously, there are reportedly different opportunities for the Pac-12 to partner with TV networks as they tried to launch their network and decided that the model that they would go with was going to be that the network would be owned by the conference fully and set up the broadcast. And I don't hate that idea, right? It's risky, right? And they took a big swing, but along the way, they made tactical errors when they had opportunities to partner, right? They never got carriage deals done with places like DirecTV. And just like, you need to be seen. Now, some of those products that were harder to see either on the Pac-12 network or, having ranked games. I remember, I think like UCLA Stanford were both like top 15 at the same time. I might be getting those rankings wrong, playing at like 10:30 p.m. Eastern. And you understand why those games exist, of course, because they're not competing with other games for viewership, because you're not going to start a North Carolina Wake Forest game at 10:30 or 9:30, whatever, on the East Coast. But massively screwing that up. There were opportunities. I think USC wanted unequal. Maybe USC and UCLA wanted unequal shares. I understand why that's a tricky thing to navigate. Obviously, there was the opportunity to add Big 12 teams when that conference was on shakier ground with Nebraska, Colorado, Mizzou, and A&M all leaving. There was the purported 4 teams, which I believe are the Oklahoma schools, Texas Tech, and Texas. Were those the 4 teams that were rumored to be on the Pac-12's radar? There were conversations, but ultimately,
it was Texas, it was Oklahoma, it was Oklahoma State, and there was.
I thought it was Texas Tech being the 4th.
Yeah, there were a handful. It was 4 to 6 rumored at the time.
Yeah, and so the way the TV deal worked out, and look, you're also dealing with a USC and UCLA duo of teams who were having budget shortfalls. Especially UCLA was reportedly like $100 million in debt, and so UCLA believed that they should exist no matter what. And even if they're $100 million in debt, they'll get bailed out by the Big Ten. And it was always USC being the preferred partner of the Big Ten for obvious reasons. It's a huge school. They've had huge success this century. But it's the Larry Scott aspect of this is, I don't think it's overblown, but I think there's context to it, because a lot of these major schools, a lot of schools in the Pac-12 had a ton of success and hired bad coaches, probably couldn't get out of it for, a number of different budgetary reasons. Clay Helton was probably at USC for too long. You have the weird Oregon State coaching situation, Washington coaching situation, Washington State coaching situation, Arizona State, Colorado. Like, these are all places that could win on an interesting national level. They could be top 20 schools, and they were bad at hiring coaches. That's not Larry Scott's fault. That's not the conference's fault. So it's a number of factors, and the biggest one is just Fox wanted USC in the Big Ten because they had a ton of Big Ten content to broadcast, and you can sell more ads, and you can sell ads at a premium when USC is playing Ohio State and not Purdue playing Ohio State, because we already know Purdue's going to win that game, or USC is playing Penn State, or UCLA is playing Michigan, right? That there are going to be more eyeballs in bigger cities, and that's what Fox determined the future of the sport should look like in the Big Ten. That's what ESPN has determined with Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. They're the ones who win. They're the ones who win. It waters down the sport. It erases history. It happened with the old Southwest Conference. It looked like it was going to happen with the Big 12. It happened with the Big East. There's a certain amount of regularity to the apocalypse is always happening within the sport, and then the sport goes on and survives. But this feels like the first time that a full region has been erased, but I'm happy to be corrected. Once again. So fun. So fun.
Yeah, Mike Varell, who we had on the program.
Yeah, does a really good job covering Washington. Yeah.
The Seattle Times spoke to the exact point that you brought up with UCLA. It wasn't just a UCLA thing, right? Washington also finds itself in a little bit of uncertainty from the financial side of things. They projected a $7.8 million deficit this financial year. We had heard stories, this goes back a couple months now, of Washington State, and they were getting a little bit less in their pocketbook because of previous overpayments as a result of their deal. So the financial status of many teams in the Pac-12 was somewhat uncertain. And, if this is all about money or Fox or ESPN or whatever, at least on that side of things, we're definitely satisfying the need. I do think a lot about schools like Oregon State and Washington State.
Sure.
I think a lot about schools like Cal and Stanford, and the situation that this leaves them in. I even think about George Kliavkoff, Dan, because he's going to get a bad rap for this, and I do think to some extent he does share in the blame. It's not all on Larry Scott. I don't think George Kliavkoff was given a great hand to play, especially after USC and UCLA left. However, there's only so much you can do when
Look,
arguably the most valuable brand in your conference decides it wants to pack up and leave. So
yeah.
he did, I think, the best that he could to try and negotiate this deal. And it sounds like there was a bit of a Hail Mary in the 11th hour to keep this thing together.
Mhm.
If he's guilty of anything, it's the fact that these negotiations were dragging on and on and on
Yes.
and
Yeah.
on without what seems to be
He
an
was buying
effective.
time. Yeah, yeah.
He was buying time in hopes that the deal would get better, and it never did.
No,
It's
he was handed a popsicle in the middle of Van Nuys, right? In the middle of a summer
exactly
day
right.
in Van Nuys, and just trying to make the best of it, trying to get under some shade, trying to buy time. Yeah, that's all it is.
I'm going to insert a commercial here so that we can catch our breath and collect a couple questions. We're going to be back
Can we
here
do that? Is it
in,
for Hotel?
in just a moment. Look, this is the way of the world now, Dan. We
Yeah.
got to try it too. We'll be right back. I don't know if it worked. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't.
I have no idea. I still see me.
All right. So here's what we got from some of the folks who are watching out on YouTube. We
Yeah.
appreciate everybody making this part of their day. We've got, wouldn't put it above the Oregon State Legislature to make Oregon and Oregon State play each other. I don't know if that's something the Oregon State Legislature can do, Dan, but I'm certainly more in favor of the Platypus Cup or the Civil War, whatever the new nomenclature is now.
Yeah. No, the Platypus Cup. I know that the trophy is a platypus, so that's fine.
We've got a lot of comments in response to your Rod Gilmore statement.
Yeah, I'm sure. I just realized that on the fly. I didn't even think about that driving home. I put a video up. You'd posted on YouTube too of my initial reaction. I was in line at the DMV when I started getting text messages, decided to get tacos, and then filmed the video. I needed the tacos.
Here's hoping the annual Apple Cup and Oregon State games survive. This is the first thing that comes up whenever you have news like this. People want to preserve the rivalries. We heard Jake Dickard from Washington State speak of the Apple Cup specifically, and you know how college football's charm is the regional nature of it. The fact that you can hop in a car and drive 4 hours and get to a rivalry.
Yeah,
and that might not be a thing. We've got this one here. Does it feel more or less seismic than the USC and UCLA?
Oh, way less seismic. This was Oregon
agree.
with limited options. This was Washington with limited options. And I'm sure they spoke with the Big 12 about what their ceiling would be financially and what the travel situation would be with Colorado and Arizona and, you know, potentially Arizona State and Utah joining. But no, that was one that was crushing. That was USC and UCLA doing everything they could at the expense of a number of other schools that they have a history with to do it all for the money, Ty.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year was way more seismic because it was effectively the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
And it also came out of nowhere. You know, that's been the one thing that we've seen a lot of over the last couple of years in college football that I feel is a little bit different. We've had these major breaking scoops, whether it's on the coaching front or conference realignment front or just otherwise, that feel like they come out of left field. And the USC UCLA news, when that hit, that was like an atomic bomb going off in college football.
Careful, Ty, careful. It's very much in the news right now. Oppenheimer still cleaning up at the box office.
It was a stun grenade hitting all of us in college football.
Thank you.
Is that better? Thank you. I think this is a little bit different because we've had months on end now to speculate.
Yeah.
And though we've kind of had a war of PR firms, I want to say, between the Pac-12 and the Big 12. I don't know to what end the Big 10 was playing in that, but if you followed college football at all over the last 6 months, you know that there's been a steady diet of articles written trashing one conference in favor of another.
Of course.
And it's been really hard to suss out who's right and who's wrong in that capacity. But there was plenty of room to speculate that this was coming, so it didn't quite hit us in the same manner. Obviously, the long-term ramifications of this are final and pretty seismic in their own right. But to answer the question, I think it was last summer.
Yeah, I'm sure it was definitely last summer. Yeah.
Okay, what else do we got here? We've got, as an Oregon fan, I was surprised that USC was totally against the move to the Big Ten due to our recruiting.
So what'll be interesting to me with USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington is how you assume they're all going to play each other. The West Coast games are going to be the protected rivals. Then everything else will sort of cycle. Like everybody's going to want to avoid going to Piscataway, right, as often as possible. Everybody's going to want to avoid going to College Park as often as possible, just because you want to limit the flight times. I'm sorry, is Minnesota tennis now going to travel to Eugene with regularity? Is Indiana softball going to host the University of Washington? And that's what I'm looking for, Ty. I'm looking for like random bad blood in a smaller non-revenue sport that I can get fully behind as a positive with this outcome that you didn't even know. But Oregon, Purdue hate each other when it comes to diving. They just hate each other. I have no idea if either school has a diving program, but I'm sure those are going to be the protected schools unless USC insists on like Cal State Fullerton. USC runs, baby. That's what they do.
Someone says this is a transfer portal for schools to switch conferences to get more money. You're not wrong.
Yeah, correct
about that. Here's one from Robbie. We can't even have a final traditional Rose Bowl game since they're one of the playoff semifinal games this year. The Rose Bowl will be an interesting topic for discussion moving forward. I saw some of the speculation was that perhaps they could host a conference championship game there instead of the historic hallowed venue of Lucas Oil Stadium, which in its own right would be a bit of a loss for the Big Ten. But I guess you got to, you got to trade off somewhere.
Yeah. I don't know what becomes of the Rose Bowl. I think the Rose Bowl is done. So you know that.
Dominic wants to know, when does the Big Ten start kicking teams out?
Ooh.
See, now listen,
inter-conference relegation.
For as much as this is a bummer,
the
prospect of relegation actually makes me kind of happy.
Sure.
If we're really going to break this thing, let's freaking break it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's break it. And the Big Ten for sure has a couple candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Rutgers is over there at Piscataway, like Scrooge McDuck, counting its coins, laughing maniacally, not having to be involved in this fray at all.
Sure.
Northwestern, maybe in the heart of the Big Ten, maybe has the academics that make other Big Ten schools proud.
2020 West champion, Ty.
2020 West champion. Okay. Yeah. They may have all that going for them, but in terms of, at least on the football field, they haven't contributed a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. No, they have not. I don't know what this, it's interesting trying to think of the different angles of reverberation here. Relegation will likely not happen, but there is a world in which Tony, whatever, the new commissioner, Petitti, how do you pronounce his name?
Tony Petitti. Yeah.
Tony Petitti, calls up Rutgers and says, you want to take 32 instead of 58? No? You sure? 33? There is that universe. I don't know. That'll never happen, but the reorganization of the sport, I don't think is done with, obviously the ACC is still yet to sort itself out, but the reorganization of the sport as we all barrel towards, the Fox conference and the Disney conference is, I think, still going to happen. And I think that's another element of it is you're going to go 24 teams. What if you had 18 teams, but made the same amount of money? Huh?
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, let me talk about that momentarily. We got a comment here from Joshua. It says everyone has talked about the future of college football having a Big Two in respect to conferences, but has it become a Big Three with all the moves of Big 12? I think so. And I give the Big 12 credit for seeing the writing on the wall. And love them or hate them. Brett Yormark.
Wait, you think there's a Big Three?
Well, there's a Big 2.5.
Clear 3.
There's a Big 2.5. Yeah. It's Big 10, it's SEC, but by virtue of its moves,
you're saying Big 12 is the third? Right now, the ACC is ahead of the Big 12.
Okay.
Right now, as we record this.
Okay.
Florida State and Clemson are in the ACC.
Sure.
Miami, for all of its lackluster ACC-specific history, is still in the ACC. North Carolina and Duke.
I'm thinking of it in terms of where I'm going with this conversation next.
Okay.
So, yes, at present, we've got 4.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're at. I do think it is only a matter of time before we do have that Big 3. I think it's only a matter of time. So there were news headlines that surfaced. Sportico had the exclusive earlier that Florida State, in its now undying pursuit of getting out of the ACC, is looking into potentially raising private equity to help presumably defray the costs of leaving the ACC. They would be forced to pay a $120 million penalty. Then there would be whatever on top of that, whatever they could litigate in court. Some estimates are that it could be $300 million or more. That's a big chunk of freaking change.
Sure.
That's a big chunk of change.
Mm-hmm.
There have been other reports. I saw rumors all throughout Twitter over the last 2 days or so that perhaps a group of teams could band together, dissolve the league, and kind of form their own in favor of each of them earning more money, to your point, right? We could have 24 teams, or we could have 18 and we can all make a little bit more. So there's all sorts of wild things floating around out there. I think by virtue of this, a team like Florida State is going to get very antsy. I think a team like North Carolina is also interested because North Carolina fits in both the Big Ten and the SEC. Virginia has a pretty big athletic department in terms of total revenue, as does Clemson. So Miami is another school that you could see fitting in a couple different ways. It just seems to me like now with this Pac-12 thing out of the way, the focus shifts to the ACC, and we know there is discontent there. I don't know how long it takes for them to figure out how to tunnel under or climb over what they've got with their grant of rights deal, which runs through 2036. But it seems like that is where this conversation goes next. And if it ends up going there, and I'm telling you this right now, if it's just one team, if it's Florida State, if it's North Carolina, Virginia, Miami, if it's just one team that decides they're out of the ACC, they're going to pay the money, maybe they're going independent, I don't know. But if it's one team, then Notre Dame breaks for the Big Ten. It takes one team in the ACC to push that chip, and then everything goes away as super conference. That's when you get your big three.
There's likely going to be some prolonged negotiation, that leaves the have-nots, the quote-unquote have-nots, at least in a secure place if this is going to be a focus, right? That there's going to be some sort of buyout that maybe is not on the level of, however many dozens of millions of dollars you're quoting, but there will be some sort of something. What was the old Gwyneth Paltrow terminology? A conscious uncoupling? There will be something along those lines in the ACC. Money will be exchanged. There will be some sort of mid-Atlantic version of the Big 12 that will come out of it. And I don't know what they're going to call themselves, the Chesapeake Conference. But I think that's where we're heading, that those big names will disperse to the Big Ten and SEC, or medium names, right? That even though Virginia is not a huge name, the academics are always going to be attractive to a place like the Big Ten. North Carolina's academics, laugh all you want after the football scandal, but otherwise, North Carolina has very good academics, that they're going to be attractive, especially with their basketball history.
All right. So listen, here's the deal. This is, I think, a good place to stop with our emergency podcast.
As we're peaking with listeners and viewers, we're going to stop. We're going to go out on top.
We could keep going if you want.
I don't know. Is there any, tell me how you feel, Ty. Like, I'm the one who gave my emotions, okay? I want to turn this on you, the more handsome half of this show.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm the one who reacted as an Oregon fan. One, you are a stakeholder because, one, you are the host of the Solid Verbal. Two, you grew up and continue to live in Big Ten country and are a Big Ten alum and half fan. You're a halftime Big Ten fan with your split Penn State Notre Dame allegiance. And three, you have to do a show with me. So if you put all of those into an emotional smoothie, Ty, how do you feel about Oregon and Washington joining the Big Ten? Not like from it seemed inevitable. We all know that. We know that.
No, look.
How do you feel?
I feel kind of bummed out by it. Everybody watching this, you're right. We are peaking. Thank you, everybody who's watching, who supports our show. Everybody watching this knows why this happened. This isn't a surprise. It's been going this way, and it maybe was inevitable. But a big part of my college football fandom was formed watching the Rose Bowl. Was formed under the assumption that the Rose Bowl was the biggest ticket in town. I remember fondly watching those old Rose Bowl games with Keith Jackson on the call, and the granddaddy of them all. Maybe we tend to romanticize college football in a way that isn't on par with reality, especially nowadays. But that was the world of college football when I grew up. And that's what turned me on to the sport. And I know it's the same for you. And so to know now that part of that is gone, the Rose Bowl won't be the same. They will
Yeah,
find ways to use the Rose Bowl. Obviously, the Rose Bowl is going to be part of the playoff. It's not like the Rose Bowl itself is going to go away, but the tradition
that
behind
was
it.
by the way, that was like one of the first major college football games I remember learning about. Oregon Penn State. That Penn State was this power. That's what Kerry Collins, Kajana Carter, if we're
Yep.
just dudes naming names at this point. And the scrappy Oregon Ducks, who had never really done anything until that point. Mike Bellotti was just the offensive coordinator for Rich Brooks way back then. I want to say Danny O'Neill was the Oregon quarterback. So that specific game was like, now Oregon is far from scrappy now, and Penn State continues to be a power, but that it's just funny that duo is us. That's all.
Right. I mean, and so my point is just that I really kind of put the Rose Bowl on a pedestal, and that to me felt like college football more than anything.
Mm.
And of course, they're going to continue to play the Rose Bowl game. It will be part of the playoff, as people have pointed out here in our chat.
Mhm.
You know, that game itself is not going away, and we'll still have the parade and all the things that kind of go around it. But the tradition has sort of been kneecapped. The tradition behind it and what made it truly special has been kneecapped.
Right.
Some of these rivalries. I'm not a West Coast guy. I don't know much about Oregon State. I know it's a hell of a rivalry. I
Right.
love watching the Apple Cup.
Yep.
The Apple
Been to a
Cup is
bunch of 'em.
the Apple Cup is always feisty. You know, these rivalries tend to be the last thing we think of whenever conference realignment, or at least the people behind conference realignment, it's the last thing they think of. So much was made of Texas and Texas A&M when that
Sure.
dissolved.
Thanksgiving weekend. Yeah.
Right. So I think the fact that we get that back next year is or starting next year is a good thing in the SEC. But it just seems like every time we have one of these big tectonic shifts that we lose something like that. We lose
Yeah.
part of that charm.
Mhm.
And that's the part that makes me sad about this.
Yeah.
That's the part, I've covered this intently in the newsletter that we send out every Thursday. And I feel like I know about as much about this as anybody. But and so for me, from that standpoint, it's not
Yeah.
really been a surprise. I think some of the shock is that's gone. I haven't had that since March, but now that it's here, the fact that one whole conference that played such a big role in my fandom, even though I didn't have a dog in that fight, that's sad.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's the part that sucks.
The
I don't
term
know.
the term that I used and we used on this show, I don't know, we did this show last year, was scar tissue.
Yeah.
And that's the thing it's almost impossible to describe to people what it feels like. They're like, "Oh yeah, you think about Washington, you think about the Apple Cup, you think about Oregon, you think about the Washington Rose Bowls, whatever." Washington fans have very specific scar tissue about every single team in the Pac-12. They have scar tissue about playing against Stanford and getting pushed around. They have scar tissue about Oregon, and other teams have scar tissue about Washington. Like Oregon fans, even though Oregon has won a majority of those matchups since whatever 2002 or whatever, Oregon fans don't love Jake Browning. Oregon fans have memories. I mean, last year's game hurts as an Oregon fan for me. And as bad as those things are, then you flip the coin and you're just like, oh, it's so fun thinking about when Oregon
Right.
stopped Christian McCaffrey in Stanford. And that's a whole different conversation.
It's a whole different conversation. Now, the one thing that I will add, though, and this is one thing that it needs to be mentioned.
Yeah.
If you're a Penn State fan,
Mm-hmm.
if you're an Ohio State fan, if you're, a fan of an existing Big Ten school.
Yeah.
Possibility exists now for much higher quality games on that schedule.
Sure.
Higher quality games. USC, you're going to get USC every so often. Oregon, Washington, these are premier programs.
Yeah.
UCLA is getting there. Maybe they're not fully there to the same degree.
Yeah.
But I mean, right now we're talking about 3 of the 4 teams leaving the Pac-12 that we have in our Pac-12 preview episode as the main contenders for the conference. So I think on that level, getting some better regular season games,
Sure.
that's okay for the fans. The tradition aspect aside, getting better regular season games, which is what college football is supposed to be all about, the regular season. It'll feel like non-conference games for a while, much the way Maryland in the Big Ten still feels that way.
They're in the Big Ten.
They're in the Big Ten, confirmed.
Yeah.
But you get where I'm going with this. I don't think that we lose out in terms of regular season games. There might be a whole lot with it that sucks and puts the sport on a weird glide path. However, I'm okay with some of those games that we don't typically see. I'm okay with Penn State, Oregon. I'm okay with Penn State, Washington.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure Washington is okay playing Rutgers. It's an easy win, but a long plane ride. Right. So that whole aspect aside, I'm okay with what I think is higher quality regular season games for the home viewer.
Yeah, and unless they don't matter as much in a 12-team playoff world, right? Unless like Oregon goes and beats Michigan State, and Michigan State still goes 11-1, doesn't have to play, or 10-2, and doesn't have to play in the Big Ten championship game, still goes to the playoff. So you're balancing that as well. That we now live in a universe in which the regular season, because of an expanded playoff, the stakes are just lower. Now you can maybe falsely say more teams are going to feel like they're in it near the end, but yes, we will get matchups that are interesting. Oregon and Wisconsin will play, and Washington and Minnesota and Michigan and UCLA and all these things will happen. Didn't they already release the matchups for the 2024 season when it was
they
just
did? They're going to have to do that again.
Go back to the drawing board and figure out how to incorporate the Ducks and the Huskies. And so, look, at the very least, I'm happy Oregon and Washington continue. That's when both teams are good. That's an incredibly emotional affair, and so happy about that. But yeah, you're right about it taking a second to remember UCLA Indiana has divisional stakes of some kind if they go to some sort of division. I don't know. It's somebody in the comments, I don't know if you want to search through it, but they're like, it all feels very sterile, and it does. It does. I watch college football because it's not the NFL. I don't want the NFL to invade my college football.
Stone Cold 316. Thank you for the super chat.
Yeah.
I don't want higher quality games. The goal is to win a championship. Better regular season games that are harder. I love games against Rutgers in Indiana.
Yeah. I don't.
Why the hell not? Why the hell not? Right.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. I guess, look, I can drive to Oregon games now from the suburbs of Chicago. There's a bunch within 3 or 4 hours. I think Ann Arbor, Madison, obviously Evanston. Not sure how far Iowa City is, but it's in that range. Bloomington's in that range, but I don't know. They're better on TV sometimes.
Better on TV sometimes. So look, why don't we leave it here? We appreciate everybody's support. There will be a part 2 that we are in the process of planning. So if you have yet to do so, hit subscribe to the channel.
Yes.
Hit the bell so that you don't miss the notification when we decide to schedule our next live stream talking about this. We will include some of our favorite reporters and friends, we promise.
Yes.
As part of that extravaganza. In the meantime, much of this audio will be available via podcast if you want to go back and listen to the audio, or if you are in search of a premier college football podcast, we are the Solid Verbal. SolidVerbal.com is our website. Make sure you go on out and hit subscribe
to the channel that you're watching right now too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Dan, until we speak next on this, you got to fade it.
Oh, yeah,
you do at the end with like an injury. For that guy, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrandt. Try to stay solid.
Peace.